Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called on the EU to apply preemptive sanctions against Russia before any potential military escalation. We'll get you those details next. Then, the Canadian government pledges about $40 billion to compensate Indigenous people who faced abuse as children at the country's residential schools. We'll bring you a full report with some analysis straight ahead.
And it was a hero's welcome for the newest world champion in Formula One, and he's talking about his future with Red Bull Racing for the first time. That and more coming up later in sports.
All right, it's time to boost your news IQ. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg held a press conference earlier today with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Brussels. During the conference, Stoltenberg made it very clear NATO is leaving the option to expand its borders on the table. Russia said NATO entering Ukraine is a red line. RT's Charlotte Dubinsky has the latest out of Paris.
There was an awful lot of information to digest. I'll try and take you through it now. He talked a lot about what he sees as being a pattern of Russian aggression and said that NATO will continue to do everything that it can to support NATO allies, NATO members. He was talking at the same time as holding the podium with the Ukrainian president. Just to point out, Ukraine isn't currently a member of NATO, although it would like to join the alliance. Jens Stoltenberg said that NATO stands with Ukraine. It supports its sovereignty and it supports Ukraine's right to defend that sovereignty, to defend its own country's borders and its territory. And he said that NATO would continue to give Ukraine practical support to be able to do this. Now, he said that NATO support for Ukraine is not a threat to Russia. His direct words on that. And he said any decision about NATO increasing its membership, enlarging to include Ukraine, will be something that is solely taken by NATO members themselves. Let's have a listen to what else he had to say.
NATO has proven over the last years that our open door policy is not only something we support in words but also in deeds, partly by inviting two new countries, Montenegro and North Macedonia, to become members. So we have enlarged the alliance over the last few years with two new members, despite protests from Russia. And also we are supporting Ukraine in Ukraine's efforts to come closer to NATO membership.
Well, he also talked about what he described as being Russia's substantial military buildup. He said over the last few weeks there have been tens of thousands of armored vehicles, personnel, army vehicles generally moving into the area, and he said that that doesn't appear to be subsiding in any way at all. He said that this buildup is provocative and this destabilizes and undermines Europe itself. So we're just getting some noise around us, but that will go in a moment. And he talked about any further aggression being something that will have severe consequences if that is against Ukraine. Now, Washington, for example, we talk about military build-up on the borders between Ukraine and Russia and in that region. Washington is actually at the moment sending fighter jets to Romania. These are fighter jets that will be able to monitor the seas and patrol the area close to the Russian border. We also know that Ukraine has been increasing its military fold near the border territories as well. Now, for its part, Russia says it is not about to invade Ukraine. That is the line over and over that we are hearing from the Kremlin.
And former UK MP George Galloway has been monitoring the situation. He's joining us now. So, George, let's begin with the explosive language coming from Ukraine's ambassador to your home, the UK, Vadim Pristaiko. He was also once the ambassador to NATO, we should note. He said, referring to Vladimir Putin, he said this, quote, "He wants one thing, Ukraine to cease existing." How dangerous is that rhetoric?
Very dangerous, very reckless, and it's very important for your viewers in particular to know that Stoltenberg and the Ukrainian ambassador to London are threatening the world with America's army, much in the way that Mussolini used to threaten the world with Hitler's army. Stoltenberg doesn't have an army. Norway doesn't have an army. Stoltenberg is a hairdresser. He's not even a soldier. This idea that a tailor's dummy can stand up in Brussels and edge the world closer to war is simply ridiculous, not least because the United States has already ruled out putting boots on the ground in Ukraine. So I'm not afraid of NATO. It has no means of waging war without the United States Army, and that's already been ruled out. The big problem is, in Putin's words, the Ukraine is being stuffed full of weapons, and the airwaves are being stuffed full of war propaganda to justify the stuffing full of weapons. And eventually, as we've discussed here before, and even figures, neocon figures accept this, that an accident can happen. A commander can let loose a Javelin anti-tank missile, or something could go awry. And before we know it, we are tumbling down a slope that it will be very difficult to climb back from.
Absolutely. Now, George, as we know, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg is meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Brussels today. Stoltenberg